Hello, I'm Tom Quiggin from the Quiggin Report, and we're here at TAG TV today, joined by PPC party leader Maxime Bernier and by journalist Tarek Fatah. A lot of people believe that Western states in general are under threat, and that threat comes from globalization and perhaps more importantly comes from radical Islam, which is spreading around the globe. The president of France, for instance, Mr. Macron, says that the French Republic is threatened because political Islam wants to secede from France. His head of intelligence says that in France they're afraid of a civil war if the terrorist attacks from the Islamists continue, and the Minister of the Interior in France stated publicly that many parts of the French Republic are no longer under French control, neighborhoods under control of drug dealers and radical Islamists. Next door in Germany we see much the same situation. The German Federal Intelligence Service has said the recent spike in anti-Semitism, or anti-Jewish hatred if you prefer that term, is not coming from the extreme right, it's coming from the Islamists. And no lesser a soul herself than the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has come right out and said there are no-go zones in Germany. And these no-go zones are occurring because of criminality and because of extremist Islam. Folks tend to forget that Angela Merkel, herself a darling of the progressive left, has said on the public record that she is not in favor of multiculturalism because it is proven to be a failure in Germany. And she says the problem with multiculturalism, it creates parallel societies which are then not manageable. Moving over to the Netherlands, we see much the same thing happening. The AIVD, which is the Dutch federal level intelligence service, has said the stability of the Dutch state is at risk because the education system has been so thoroughly penetrated by Islamists that the young folks there now believe that it is their job not to integrate into Dutch society, and the AIVD feels that this is a long-term threat to the Netherlands as a stable society. Now, moving over here to Canada, we've seen many of the same sort of issues. We have a series of terrorist attacks carried out by Islamists. We see a lot of talk about political entryism into the Canadian system by Islamists and by criminals to a much larger degree. And we've also seen a lot of other problems emerging that we're not allowed to talk about. For instance, the Danforth shooting, the aircraft being rammed at Pearson Airport by an individual who we're not even allowed to identify in particular. So we see these kinds of problems occurring, and we're starting to ask ourselves in Canada, should we be talking about these issues? Integration, migration, globalism, the sort of global war that's going on out there with radical Islam, are these things we should be talking about in this election? So, as I said today, we're joined by PPC party leader Maxime Bernier and by Tarek Fatah. So I think what we'll do here is we'll start with you, Maxime Bernier, and say, given your policies on migration and multiculturalism, what sort of issues drive you? What's most important to you? And why are you talking about these things when other parties don't even seem to want to talk about these issues?
Because it is too important for the future of our country. And you're right when you said that multiculturalism failed in Europe and in Canada also. Now what we're doing in this country, we celebrate every diversity and ethnicity, and that must not be that. We must celebrate what unites us. So that's why I said in our policy position that we will repeal the Multiculturalism Act in Canada. We want people who come here and share our Canadian values. So in our immigration policy, we will be sure to have between 100,000 and 150,000 immigrants a year, but we want to be sure that we'll be able to do a face-to-face interview with them to know if they share our Canadian values, our Western civilization values, equality before the law, equality between men and women. And so that's too important. We want these people who are coming here to be part of our society. And right now, there's only 26% of our immigrants that are economic immigrants, and 74% of them are refugees or coming under reunification of family. We must change that ratio. Yes, we'll have fewer immigrants, a maximum of 150 a year, but we'll have a bigger ratio of economic immigrants. We need these people that will come here, that they will have a job, it will be easier for them to integrate. And at the same time, we must not be we must look at also what's happened in other countries. And in Germany, in Belgium, in France, they have huge challenges to integrate their immigrants. We don't want that in this country. So that's why our party is speaking about that right now, because we like this country and we want this country to be like that in 25 years, from 25 years. So let's have this debate. And it is the same time also, I said in that speech that radical Islam, and it is the most dangerous ideology right now on the planet, and we must acknowledge that, and we must give more resources to our security agency like CISIS, like the RCMP, and also the Department of Immigration, to be sure to do the right background check on people who want to be Canadians.
It's interesting you bring up this idea of radical Islam, or what I would actually call political Islam. That is to say, as President Macron of France correctly identified, he said political Islam wants to separate from the French Republic. But he clarified his comment, and I thought this was fascinating. He said, this is a political force masquerading as a religion. And I think this is part of the problem with the public discussion, is most people, as soon as you start to talk about the issue, they go, oh, you're Islamophobic, or you're racist, or whatever. But the reality is there is this force called political Islam, the Islamist or extremist Islam, however you choose to put a nomenclature on it. But this is a group who are supremacists in nature. They genuinely believe they have their right to impose their values on everyone else. They're here in Canada. They operate through a number of front groups. So would you be actually willing to tackle the sort of Muslim Brotherhood and Hizb ut-Tahrir type front groups that are here in Canada? Would you say we should defund them? Should we ban them from public office?
But
or that
actually,
sort of thing?
we must look at what are they having from the federal government. I know that they can have maybe a tax break from our tax system, but we have to look at all that, and it would be important to have that discussion in Canada. So everything is on the table with us.
Okay. Tarek Fatah, would you like to jump in? I mean, the issue of multiculturalism sort of pops to the top here, and also the issue of integration. These are two issues I know are near and dear to your heart.
Let me be very clear about one thing. All cultures are not equal. In the culture where my daughter, who's autistic, gets the highest respect of the state and the citizenry, is a superior culture than a culture that says autistic children are a curse on society. The culture that says I need blade marks on my face to identify my tribe is inferior to the culture that says you and I are citizens of a country based on a constitution, not the color of our skin. Had this been multiracialism, I would have celebrated it. Multiculturalism is a curse because it lowers every culture to the lowest common denominator, whether it is female genital mutilation as part of the culture, whether it is 5-year-old girls in my neighborhood being put under a blanket cover, and where ordinarily sensible, educated people are lambasting the Quebec government for doing what Quebec has been doing since 1960, when they had the social revolution to create individualism, Quebec has been leading Canada in its values for now at least 100 years. That is multiculturalism, when the culture that listens to the same music. If you listen to Wagner and you are from Russia, and I listen to Tchaikovsky, and we are part of that culture. But I am part of a multicultural in terms of me being an Indian born in Pakistan. I have to share my culture and my acceptance and celebration of somebody who's a Hindu or a Jew. Canada's multiculturalism policy suggests that my hatred of the Jew and the Hindu, because it is part of my culture, should be accepted. And hence we have M103 that says that me as a Muslim have no right to criticize what Martin Luther did 500 years ago when he went and nailed the 95 Theses. I'm not a fan of Martin Luther for his anti-Semitism, but if a Christian has the right to tell the Pope where to go, or to stand up as a comedian and make fun of his own religion, I as a Muslim, do I have the right to make fun of the Ayatollah, to make fun of Saudis wearing female frocks and large gowns flowing all over and adjusting headdresses that belong to the 6th century? I'll give you an example of why this policy has caused disaster, and I'm not going to bring you an example from Canada. We all say United States is a melting pot. That's nonsense. I was in DC yesterday. 30,000 Americans, Pakistanis, cheered wildly when Taliban Khan, the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, announced in Urdu, not in English, he didn't speak in English at all, to 30,000 Americans. He said, I will create in Pakistan a state based on 7th century Arabia under Islamic law. And 30,000 Americans went wild, because even though they have taken swearing their citizenship on the American Constitution, their loyalty primarily belongs to 7th century Arabia. Without ink, without paper, without water, without structures, without pyramids, without the Taj Mahal, without the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. They want nothing of that sort. They want primitiveness that then leads to the wars of expansion and destruction and genocide of other people.
Okay, so Mr. Bernier, let's sort of taking that thought, let's turn this back around to something a little more practical, something more political on a policy basis. Radical Islam, political Islam, the Islamists, however one chooses to describe that, are spreading throughout the West at a rather amazing speed. The Muslim Brotherhood itself has a structured, permanent presence in about 82 or 83 different countries, including Canada, America,
Absolutely.
Norway, Belgium, etc., etc. From a practical point of view, what could you do about this sort of thing? So I've heard in Ottawa, I've heard discussions about getting a bill put forth through Parliament where we would ban foreign funding of religious groups from countries where we cannot be where we cannot have reciprocity. So for instance, it's okay for Qatar to fund extremism in Canada, but if we tried to fund even a Baptist church in Qatar, of course that would be forbidden. So are those the kinds of things we think Parliament should be looking at, is to actually tackle the issue head on by defunding it, or do you have other ideas on how to go about this sort of thing?
I don't know what would be the best solution, but when I said everything is on the table, we must have a parliamentary committee in Ottawa that their mandate will be to look at it. And I want Canadians to know what's happening in our country right now. So let's be open, let's have a frank discussion and debate, and we'll find the right solution. That can be a solution. I cannot tell you which one will be the best, but we must understand what's happening in our country. And it's people like you that will be part of this process to inform Canadians with facts, and after that we'll be able to take the right decision. But it is sad that I'm the only politician in Ottawa, the only leader that is ready to speak about it.
But you're being attacked.
Oh, absolutely.
Unfairly attacked, as I don't even know what the word ultra-right means.
Yeah.
I have no clue. There
was no clue either.
No,
I don't want to know.
I always vote, by the way, NDP, and yet I'm being told I'm ultra-right. So I don't know. Ed Broadbent must be, weeping in his grave. What the left today. In fact, what it means is that only millionaires are Marxists nowadays. That's also quite funny.
I think ultra-right now is just someone who disagrees with the existing progressive narrative. If you agree with the progressive narrative, you're okay. As soon as you step away from that, you're ultra-right. That to me is all that it, I think, means at this point.
But it's not progressive to put a black tent over a woman.
Yeah, but for me, I don't want people to judge us with title right or and right or left. So for me, look at our policies.
Yes.
Read our policies. I'm speaking to the intelligence of Canadians. I don't want to play with their emotion. People's Party of Canada website, they're going to see our policies. They can go there and look at our policies and read it, and they will see that It's serious. It's based on bold reforms that are so important for this country. And you know, we have support from former liberals that are coming with us because they want lower taxes and a balanced budget, and they like our discussion on immigration. And we have former conservative. So we're a kind of a coalition all behind the freedom ideas and the Western civilization values.
Yeah. One of the other subjects that's out there floating around a lot is this term globalization, and as Tarek has so correctly pointed out, I mean, it's hard to describe it, it's hard to define it. It means whatever you happen to mean at that particular moment. But for a lot of people, globalization means something like Trudeau says when he says, you know, we don't have Canadian values anymore, we have pan-cultural values, we have globalist values. And I think for many people when they talk about globalization, that's what they worry about. So, for instance, we have the UN Global Compact on Migration. We have Mr. Trudeau discussing refugee levels, and he says, well, you know, we have to follow the UN agreements. And I think what we're seeing in the minds of many people is the word sovereignty is being attacked. In other words, a lot of Canadians I grew up, my parents grew up with the idea that Canada was a sovereign state. It's a Westphalian state. We try to cooperate with others, we try to help out when we can, but at the end of the day, our house, our rules, we make the decisions inside our borders, for better or for worse, and whatever folks want to do in their country, you know, that's up to them to a certain degree. So I think this is when I hear people say they're afraid of globalization, they're worried about globalization, or why they identify the Islamists and the globalists as the two greatest threats. That's what I hear when I hear the fear of globalization. So where would you be with the UN? Where would you be with the UN Global Compact on Migration? Where would you be on the issue of Canadian sovereignty? Because I think that resonates with folks either consciously or subconsciously when they find out they could be subjected to rules created by some absolutely weird body in the United Nations run by a bunch of countries who have no human rights to start with. So where are you in that issue? What would you say to people on these kinds of things?
But first of all, I said that the UN is a dysfunctional organization, and I believe it. We want to keep our sovereignty. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Canadians must be able to do the rules and the regulation that are applied to them here in Canada. And about the UN Global Compact on Migration, I was the first politician to say I won't sign that. But you know, Justin Trudeau said we can sign it because it is not officially binding. And so, but that's not the question. The question is, why you're signing an agreement like that if you don't want to follow the rules? So if you're signing it, it's because you believe in it. So if because you believe in it, that will have that all the UN logic will apply to our own legislation, and that will be our civil servant and bureaucrats in Ottawa that will change our legislation to be in line with the UN. I don't want that. Migration, it is not a normality. We need to keep our borders, we need to keep our sovereignty, and we need to have we must continue to be able to choose our immigrants and people who will come to our country. So for me, keeping our sovereignty, it's the most important. Look what happened in Europe, in UK, the Brexit party over there. They created that party 4 months before the European election, and they won in UK. So, and they were right. You know, right now what's happening in Europe with that parliament that is over the sovereignty of other countries like UK, we don't want that. The UN, in their goal, in the long-term goal, the goal is to have a global government, and I don't believe in that. We can, as a government, like you said in the beginning, having free trade agreements and negotiation with other countries, but I don't want another institution doing the rules for our country.
Okay, just following on with that, there's when you mentioned, I mean, people say, you know, we can sign the UN agreements because, you know, they don't really mean anything anyway. They're just sort of a general thought. This, of course, is what we were told about M103, the anti-Islamophobia motion. What I used to worry about, it's a parliamentary motion like dozens of others. But yet, as we've seen, the next thing you know, the parliamentary motion becomes a committee. The committee gets funding, and the next thing you know, here we are. So that, to me, is sort of that creeping globalization problem.
There's one point I would like to, that I'm in... sorry to differ with you, I'm in favor of that compact. My position is that migration should be directed towards Saudi Arabia. The largest amount of land, the most wealth possible, it's got water, oil, soil, greenery, everything, and no people. So if Saudi Arabia cannot take a Muslim as a refugee, sign the deal and throw it back to Kuwait, to Saudi Arabia, to Abu Dhabi, to Qatar. Qatar seems quite concerned about Muslims in Canada. But this Muslim just happens to be worried about Qatar, because Qatar is a racist, dictatorship, anti-black country, which has a specific name for black-skinned people. That is why Saudi Arabia is an apartheid state. Blacks get 30% of the salary that European whites get over there. People are being killed as domestic servants. Sign the accord. This is my perspective as a left of center person. I want to address the 25 million people that have been uprooted by the dictators of Zimbabwe and Congo and every place over there, unaccountable to anyone. I want to direct those 25 million people to settle down in Saudi Arabia and live happily ever after. And the world's problems will be solved.
So we share the same view, because
Yes.
I don't want these people to come to Canada. 25 million.
By the way, I would simply ask that if in the 25 million people, there are folks who respect Canadian values, first and foremost, who accept that laws do not come from divine texts.
So
if people are saying Allahu Akbar when they enter in Canada, I'm scared, because anytime Allahu Akbar said, some Muslims die. So Muslims have killed more Muslims than all the Syrian 500,000 dead were not killed by Jews or Hindus or Christians. They were killed by my people.
So you think it would be a fair question to put to immigrants and say, which do you accept as the superior law? That of the Quran or that of the Constitution?
No.
That must be a question.
That must be a question. I agree with the lady, I forget her name, who was run down by the Conservatives. She ran for the leadership.
Kelly Leach?
Kelly Leach.
Yeah, she said a genuine thing. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but the Conservatives abandoned her like a hot potato, because she asked an honest question. That you coming to Canada and you say, I want 4 wives. I'm not giving you 4 wives. Yeah. You get out of here and your wife will have 4 husbands. Yeah. So either deal with the truth fast and hard. No left, right, nothing.
But that's what we're doing. That's what
I know.
And that's why every person must have a face-to-face interview with serious questions, and that must be part of the questions.
Absolutely.
Which law is your law? The law of the land, or Sharia law? We'll know right now.
Here's the point. 99% of them will lie and say the law of the land. Yeah, there is a different technique to this. They have to sign on a certain document that says that any place of worship in which another religious community is condemned. This happens 17 times a day in every mosque of this country, where Christians and Jews are condemned. They should not have tax service. They should have the right to hate. We can identify the hate mongers and shame them. But they should not have...
That's freedom.
Freedom of speech. Yeah. Freedom of speech. But they can't take Tom's tax deduction and my money and make them hate me. So immigration, the suggestions you're talking in good faith, sir.
But we can add it with another
It has
reform.
To be very strict.
So actually, it's interesting about freedom.
And if it's a cost in your pocket,
yeah.
So the Quiggin report, when I started, it was actually based on the concept of freedom of speech. And I was shocked as a Canadian citizen. I mean, I'm ex-military. I spent time in the war in Bosnia. I've been to places like Albania and Belarus and Eastern Russia. I worked for all the exciting places everybody wants to go, like Tirana in northern Albania and places like that. Liki Petrovo Selo in Bosnia. I've been to every, like, as Trump would say, every crap hole on the planet. But and I never figured out if the military really liked me and sent me to those places, or they're just trying to get rid of me. But anyway, back to something more serious here. As a person who was born here, raised here, educated here, served in this country's military, served overseas, testified in court against a Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorist plot, all of a sudden, I start discovering 3 or 4 or 5 years ago that people are trying to tell me I'm not allowed to speak out on issues in Canada. And I was utterly shocked because I always thought I won the global lottery by being born in Canada. And having been to places like Belarus or Albania or Bosnia, or a bunch of countries in Southeast Asia where I see how good people live under really horrible conditions because of their governments. I'm shocked as a Canadian citizen to find out that I have a government telling me I'm not allowed to speak, I'm attacked, I'm subject to lawsuits because of the issue of free speech. And to me, and I know this is a bit of a controversial thing, to me, freedom of speech is your single greatest right, more so than perhaps even your right to life.
Yes.
Because any society that has freedom of speech or a democracy, you can lose a few lives, you can lose some money, you can lose a bit of terrain here and there. But as soon as you lose freedom of speech, everything else goes with it. So, am I the strange one? Am I a weird person because I'm committed to this, or?
No, you're not. You're not. And I'm very pleased to be with you today. And I want to congratulate you for what you're doing. And that's so important. And yes, you must be proud to be Canadians and speak about what you believe and what you know. It is too important for the future of this country.
Okay.
Can I add over here? This war against freedom of speech is going on now for 10 years. I just want to recall the case against Macleans magazine by the Canadian Islamic Congress of Dr. Muhammad al-Masri. It's finished and divorced. How ferociously they fought to defame Macleans magazine as an anti-Islamic agenda. They lost in the end, but it took a very expensive lawyer, Mr. Porter is his name, to fight that case on Macleans. There was nobody supporting Macleans in the Freedom of Speech Act because everyone was scared. Nobody wishes to live with the label of racist on the label. There are lawsuits against you. There are lawsuits all over trying to shut down people who their only flaw is, the only crime is that they're saying we fought 400 years for these rights. Reformation, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment period. Yeah. Voltaire is us. Yeah. We may come from India, but we came here to get the right not to be harassed by cops. Yeah. And now we see that in the police forces, sir, the consultancy advisory committees have Muslim Brotherhood advisors sitting on it.
Let me, following that, let's move into a slightly different discussion. This is the issue of de-policing. Yeah. So there was a student who's an ex-policeman at Carleton University, did a very extensive study with a huge number of interviews on the issue of de-policing. And what he says is about 70% of all frontline police in Canada and the northern United States, because he worked down into New York and a few others, said, will make decisions on a daily basis on the concept of de-policing. That is to say, if they see an incident arising and they look out and they see 2 white guys about to do something, they'll say, fine, they go in there and bust them, no problem. But if they see someone who's a Muslim or someone who's brown or black, they'll literally drive by. And the expression now is Fido. Forget about it, drive on. And only respond to a situation when they get a 911 call. So the problem as they see it is if they try to enforce the law in a neutral manner, they will be accused of being anti-black or Islamophobic or racist or something like that. So rather than risk that problem, they literally just drive on and keep going. And that goes right up to about the sort of inspector level at the police forces, that folks aren't willing to enforce the law anymore because political correctness has determined how police forces are being run. And when you have somebody who's done this massive study on de-policing and said about 70% of all frontline police now make decisions based on ethnicity, color, or religion, or whatever, that to me is serious because along with freedom of speech, a democracy has to have a functioning police force.
Absolutely.
And this is, what we would call the social contract.
Yeah.
You and I and Tarek and everybody else agree to give up the right to shoot our neighbor because he plays his music too loud. We can't use violence to problem solve, so we turn violence over to the state and say only the state can use violence in order to maintain law and order. But if we have freedom of speech dissolving in front of us, and that's our ability to think and whatever is going, and if at the same time we see our police forces no longer willing to engage in a number of situations, then that to me is, there's our democracy that's in problem. So how do you think you can go about, at the end of the day, challenging political correctness, which lies at the root of all these problems? That to me is the issue.
But I'm doing that, I'm doing that every time, and on the social media when I'm doing interview. As I said a couple of months ago that there's no more political correctness with us at the PPC, and if that happened, we must be open to speak about that, and there's a law for everybody. If we cannot trust the authority like police to enforce the law, we're not in a democracy anymore. So that's the division of powers. The politician, we are making the law, and the police are doing the enforcement, and the judge are doing the law case, and the judiciary system. So there's three pillars of a democracy. So if the one who is enforcing the law is not working, I think it's the role of the politician to speak about it and be sure that there's no more political correctness in the law enforcement.
Just one last one. We had the anniversary of the Danforth shooting yesterday, or was it the day before?
Yep.
The police chief said he doesn't know why the guy shot. The person who was shooting has witnesses saying he was shouting Allahu Akbar. I, as a Muslim, know why he was killing. The neighbors in Thorncliffe Park know who he was. He went to Pakistan and Afghanistan, stayed there. But when the mayor, the member of parliament, when the Minister of State Security, what's his name? Yeah. A minister at that level blocks a reporter simply because I'm saying one day after the incident, I forget his name, sorry.
Hashim.
No, the Minister of Safety.
Ralph Goodale.
Yeah, Goodale. Mr. Goodale says we have all evidence that there is no connection. That itself means that he has knowledge that there is a connection, because just laid out mathematically, logically, he couldn't have said that unless there was a connection, because he would say, I don't know if there was no connection. And they have 1 year after that, and they are still refusing to take the name, the religion. They don't have an answer why he went to live in Pakistan.
It's more than just that. There was the vehicle attack on Parliament Hill last summer in August that we're not allowed to know about. Sitting right across the street from us is Pearson Airport, where an individual drove a fuel truck into an airplane for reasons we don't understand. And then there was 2 Iranians arrested in Richmond Hill. And again, Mr. Goodale immediately said that it's a local police matter, there's no connection to national security, of course, which was an outright lie. It was a multi-jurisdictional, international, national security case. So if you were to be in a leadership role, if you were to become Prime Minister, what sort of directions do you give to your Public Safety Minister?
Transparency.
Do you think the country
Tell the truth. Transparency. I think people are able to deal with that. They are able to deal with the truth. Tell them the truth and we'll deal with it. That's it.
Okay. So one more quick thought, just as we're sort of coming to the end of this. Mr. Trudeau, the Liberal leader, has on a number of occasions said that he welcomes the return of ISIS fighters to Canada because they'll be a powerful voice for the de-radicalization program. And of course, I have a couple of technical problems with that. One of them is Canada doesn't actually have a de-radicalization program. And such as it is, our de-radicalization program
is being done by radicals.
It's done by radicals. It's also presumed to be based on ideology.
I know the radicals who run that.
Yeah.
For goodness sake, stop lying to Canadians.
Yes.
We are too good a people. We are too decent a people to deal with this crookedness.
Yeah. So again,
you can't go to a prom date, but you can have 13 husbands in Syria, and then you bring those ISIS wives back and leave them in my neighborhood in downtown Toronto, in burqas where I can't even know if it's a man or a woman. Like, for heaven's sake, sir, please be the Prime Minister.
Yeah, they decided to fight against Western civilization values and against Canadian values. That's their decision. They were not children, adults, and now they must deal with the consequences of that and stay outside our country. That's it.
Okay, so we're down basically about to the last minute here. Do you have any closing thoughts on maybe what are the most important issues in this area? It's integration, migration, immigration, national security. What sort of jumps to your mind as the most important thing?
First of all, immigration. Second would be also our security. I think that it is important. And third one will be integration of our immigrants that are coming, newcomers. They must be part of our society. They must celebrate our society and not try to bring what they're doing at home here in Canada. It's their choice to come here. If you want to come visiting me, visiting us, you know, and you want to be part of that family, share the values of that family. And
Absolutely.
the Canadian family is very open.
Yeah.
Everybody is open, but they have to follow our rules. And I think that's important. The integration is another part.
Okay, well, let me close that off. Thanks very much for joining us, Mr. Bernier. A pleasure to be here. Tarek Fatah, thank you for your participation. And I'm Tom Quiggin from the Quiggin Report. Thank you very much for joining us here at TAG TV as we discuss the issues of integration, migration, national security, and in fact, very much the future of Canada. Thank you.